Sanhedrin Daf Ches Amud Bet. Memory is different from knowledge. Chaver ein צריך התראה. We have an amazing concept today regarding human nature, how the quality of knowledge in the moment of an event is substantially different from the quality of that knowledge 2 minutes later. That we lose impact within seconds of experiencing something, of experiencing an event. And that's why we can experience the most dramatic miracles, and a few minutes later the drama has been diluted and the extraordinary becomes ordinary. We have that power to diminish the impact of something that happens in our lives. And it's a gift, because without that, we would be carrying tragedy and loss with us through life. We're able to diminish the impact of negative experiences in our lives so that we can move on. But it also affects positive experiences, and how we manage that is important. The Gemara deals with, I think there are 6 different ways of explaining a line in the Mishnah on Daf Beis. One of them is Rav Papa at the bottom of Daf Ches. And in order to explain it, he comes onto a brisa, machlokes between the Chachomim and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. It's a machlokes. This is a difference of opinion that we're going to have several times still in our Masechta and in the next Masechta in Makos, which is whether a chaver צריך התראה. That means we know already that a Beis Din, we talked in the very first year on Sanhedrin, a Beis Din is not constructed for punishment. And we see that because the halachot of punishment are so difficult to execute that it's hardly ever that Beis Din can actually do it. So clearly that's not their purpose, to punish. Their purpose is to judge. And in the first year we talked about the difference between judgment and punishment. One of the ways that the Torah makes it difficult to execute punishment is the din of hatraa. You've got to warn the person, the witnesses or others have to warn the individual within seconds of him doing the wrong, that what he's about to do is wrong and punishable. And he's got to say, I am aware of that and I'm doing it nevertheless. So a person's about to be Mechalel Shabbos, somebody has to tell him, if you do that, you're doing an Issur D'Oraisa, the consequence of that is death, and we're going to bring you to Beis Din and you're going to die. And he says, that's okay, I'm willing to do it. How often is that going to happen? So that's where we see the system being built in to clarify the role of Beis Din is not to punish, it's to judge. But this law of Hatra'ah, what happens if he's a Talmid Chacham? Do you also have to tell him this? Do you have to teach a Talmid Chacham that if you're about to light this fire on Shabbos, it's a chiyuv misa? You know that. What are you telling him? But there's a machlokes Rabbi Yossi and Chachomim. It's not so simple. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda omer chaver ein tzarich hatraa. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says a chaver, a Talmid Chacham, somebody who knows the law, doesn't need hatraa. It's interesting, and we'll see further on. It doesn't say somebody who knows the law. It says a chaver. We're not talking about a level of knowledge. We're talking about a type of human being, a Talmid Chacham. A Talmid Chacham doesn't need hatra'ah, says Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachomim say he does. Why does Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda say he doesn't need hatra'ah? Lefi shelo nitna hatra'ah ela lavchin ben shogeg lemezid. Why do you have to warn the person so that he's not going to say, I didn't know? He's not going to plead ignorance. So we've got to make sure that he's not ignorant. That's why we do it. To a chaver, that doesn't apply. A person who's knowledgeable, a person who's a Talmid Chacham, we know that he's not ignorant. We know that he knows the law. As says Rashi, shelo yuchal lomar savur hayiti shemutar. That he will not be able to say, oh, I never knew that you're not allowed to light fires on Shabbos. Never learned that. I didn't know. So in order to prevent that possibility, we do hatra'ah. We warn him and we teach him. Before he's about to do wrong, we teach him the impact of what he's about to do. But if he's a chaver, that's not necessary, says Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. So what about the chachamim? Why would you have to do hatra'ah? Why would you have to warn the Talmid Chacham? That doesn't make any difference. Well, we'll see further on Daf Mem. Omar ula minayin l'hatra'ah min haTorah. Where does the Torah say you've got to warn somebody? And Shneimar, he brings a pasuk. Says Tosfot, b'chaver kame bayele. That Gemara on Daf Mem is talking about how do you know that you've got to do hatra'ah, that you've got to warn and teach a Talmid Chacham, according to the view of the Chachomim who say you do have to warn the Chachomim. According to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, there's no question in the Gemara on Daf Mem Amud Beis, says Tosfos. The whole question is according to the Chachomim. Why? Because because if we're talking about somebody who's not knowledgeable, of course you need atraa. You don't need a posuk. You just need to know that a person is only punished if he's mazid, if he does it deliberately. How do you know it was deliberate if he claims I was ignorant? You need witnesses to say, but 2 minutes before that or seconds before that, we taught you that it was forbidden, so you can't claim ignorance. That's for an ordinary person. For a chaver, you don't need that. It says Tosfos, that's what Ula says, but for a chaver, we've got psukim. And that's why the Chachomim hold, in that case, it's a kind of Gzeras HaKosov, that even though the logic of warning doesn't apply to a chaver, but there are psukim, the Torah says, nevertheless, you've got to do it. The Rambam says the most amazing thing, the Rambam squeezes in, and it's noticed. The Rambam says, look at the wording of the Rambam. Echad Talmid Chacham ve'echad Amar, it's צריך התראה. You have to warn. Who's the Rambam paskening like? Whether you're a Talmid Chacham or you're an ignoramus, you've got to warn. Is paskening like the Rabbon. Why do you have to warn? Shelo nitna atraa elo lehavchin ben shogeg lemezid shema shogeg haya. The Rambam gives the very reason that the Gemara gives for Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Why do you have to warn even a Talmid Chacham? So as to differentiate between a shogeg and a mezid. Explains the Lechem Mishnah, the Rambam is not talking about, as Rashi explains in Rabbi Yossi. Yes, with Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Yehuda, we're concerned maybe he'll say, I didn't know the law. In the case of the Chachomim, it's not that I didn't know the law. He might say, it wasn't my intention to do it. Had I known, had I been aware of everything at the moment I was doing it, wasn't intention. It says the Lechem Mishnah v'shogeg mezid shekatav Rabbeinu, the Rambam, eino ela shogeg u'mezid b'inyan ha'ma'aseh shelo haya da'ato la'asoto. He'll say, I didn't intend to do it. We're talking about intention, not knowledge. So we say, how could you not have had intention? We told you a moment before that this was Asur Midoraisa, this is an Isur Doraisa. So the Lechem Mishnah introduces the idea that the Rambam is Mechadish. The Rambam innovates this idea that for Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yehuda, the reason is in case he doesn't know the law. But the same mechanism applies. This which we learn from Psukim on Daf Mem, that even a Talmid Chacham needs hatraa, even a person with knowledge needs to be warned, is not to avoid the claim of ignorance, it's to avoid the claim of lack of intent. It wasn't my intention to do it. How do you mean it wasn't your intention to do it? We told you, we warned you. So that's what how the Lechem Mishnah understands the Rambam. And that's probably what the Ktseis HaChoshen means. There's an amazing Ktseis HaChoshen in Siman Kavchet where he says that it's a chidush shechidsha Torah b'hatra. This is an absolute chidush, that there has to be total clarity. Ad she'itbarer hadavar bevadai shelo yomar shogeg. Until you're absolutely certain he won't say shogeg. And the Ktseis himself struggles with it a little bit. Really? You're going to have the Rav Moshe Feinstein, Chas v'Sholem, is about to do something wrong, and we're worried he's going to say, I didn't know it was also? How much clearer do you need to be than the Posek Hador will tell us he didn't know? How much clearer can you be? But the way the Lechem Mishnah understands it is better. Yes, we're not worried that he'll say, I didn't know the halacha. We're worried he might say, it wasn't my intention, I wasn't thinking. So you can't say, I wasn't thinking, because we told you minutes before. So that's how the Lechem Mishnah is. I understand the Lechem Mishnah and the Ktseis HaChoshen all going in one direction to explain the Rambam, where the Rambam says that although Rashi says for Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, the issue is knowledge, was I ignorant or wasn't I ignorant? According to the Chachomim, we learn from the Psukim on Daf Mem that the issue is intent. It's not just ignorance. To understand the Rambam, so we learned yesterday a piece of Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Bloch, you'll remember. Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Bloch, what we learned was a piece from his hesped for his father, Rabbi Yosef Elei Bloch. And the explanation of the Rambam that we learn today is his father's, is the Telzer of himself, Rabbi Yosef Elei Bloch. And he says, we've explained that it's possible to explain the Rambam by understanding that the same logic that applies to an Am Haaretz, an ignorant person, also applies to a Talmid Chacham. What is that? Shelo nitna hatraa ela lavchin ben shogeg lemezid. The Rambam uses the same words that Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Yehuda uses. So Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Yehuda is talking about an ignorant person. The Chachomim are talking about a wise person. And they're saying even a wise person needs hatra, even a person who's a Talmid Chacham needs hatra. But the Rambam not only uses the idea, but he uses the very same words as Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Yehuda. And he says the reason is, Hainu mishum she'ena dome midat hayediah b'toch kedei dibur shel hatra lidiyato acharei avor zman amirat shalosh milim. You cannot compare the knowledge and mindfulness of somebody who has just been warned about a death sentence, very dramatic, to the knowledge of that same person a few seconds later, as long as it takes to say three words. So we're talking about maybe 4 seconds. That 4 seconds dilutes the impact of the knowledge that he had at the moment that he was warned of the possibility of a death sentence. Ki kol yediyot ha'adam hen keshalhevet keshura begachelet. Because you should know, tells Arov, that all human knowledge is like a flame attached to a coal. And he takes that from the Ramchal. Shetzruchim bechol eit lahalhiva. Unless you oxygenate the flame gets weaker and weaker and it goes out. As long as you don't keep it alive, it diminishes. And within seconds, the impact of the knowledge you had in the moment starts diluting, and it disappears just a little bit. Ve'ein zeh od mezid gamur. And that's no longer absolute mezid. So what we're learning from these psukim on Daf Mem, that the mezid gamur that the Ktsos HaChoshen talks about, this absolute deliberate intent. You're not punished unless your intention was deliberate. How deliberate? Says the Tells Arov, there's a whole spectrum of deliberateness. How dafka were you? How dafka you were means how clearly you knew the prohibition. Is it something you learned in Cheder 50 years ago? Or is it something you just learned a week ago? Or is it something you learned 2 seconds ago? There's no comparison between those different levels of mindfulness and of awareness. And for it to be a mezid gamur, it has to be within 4 seconds of knowledge. Ki madrigot le'en shiur yeshnan mishogeg gamur ad mezid gamur. Because there are uncountable steps between absolute shogeg and absolute mezid. On the spectrum, you've got totally mistake. I was unintentionally to the extreme and intentional to the extreme. There's not just two ideas. Was it intentional or was it unintentional? Did you mean it? Didn't you mean it? Was it on purpose? Wasn't it on purpose? It's not binary. There's a long spectrum of how intentional was it. The Chachamei Zal ha'emiku bichlale haTorah umadedu kochot nafsho shel adam, and the Chachomim went deeply into the psyche of the human being and measured his soul. Umatzu, and they found ki hamezid sheoto ha'enisha haTorah, that level of deliberateness which the Torah punishes, צריך להיות במידה כזו שתהיה הידיעה ברורה אצלו כל כך. Has to be absolute clarity, as in the moment that you learn it. עד שבתוך כדי דיבור של התראה יעשה את המעשה, so that you do it within 4 seconds, ואם עבר זמן מעט יותר מאמירת 3 מילים, אפילו אם רק בחלק אחד מ100 משיעור אמירת מילה אחת. So if 4.1 seconds, it's already not mezid. It's not the same level of mezid. And what's important is not just the technical aspect of that halakha, so measure, was it exactly, wasn't it? What's important is the message in this. That means that 4.1 seconds after you've learned something, you've lost it. It's not, this doesn't mean you've lost it altogether, you don't have dementia, but you've lost the forcefulness of it. You've lost the power of it. And that's something, unless you're constantly reviewing it and constantly recreating it. Then he goes on with Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, ולכן לא אמר כי היודע את ההלכה אין צריך התראה, כי ודאי מי שאינו חבר אין ידיעתו ברורה. He says, and that's why it doesn't say somebody who knows the halakha doesn't need atraa. That's not what Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says. It says a chaver, because Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, the tells the Rav believes that a chaver is somebody whose head is in Torah all the time. He's always thinking about it. He's always aware of it. He doesn't need hatra'ah, because at this very moment he's thinking of Hashem. At this very moment he's standing before Hashem. At this very moment the Torah is in his mind. What does he need hatra'ah for? What does hatra'ah add? No, say the Chachomim, for this particular achah, you need even more than that. You need a real dramatic awareness at the very moment of that. And that gives us an idea of how we need to work to keep things alive. We can experience the most amazing miracles from the earliest time of Kriyas Yamsuf until our very day today. And within hours of it happening, we're back to normal. Everything's back to, we've lost it. We forgot that feeling we had at the time of the miracle. The feeling we had, I remember during the time of the 6-Day War, and we've had it again now, during the time of the 6-Day War, I had a feeling that Mashiach has to come because the whole country's done tshuva. The whole country did tshuva. There was no such thing as an atheist. There was no such thing as a chiloni. Until a few hours later. And then we're back. Why? Because it doesn't last. And you have to work to make it last. You've actually got to work to make it last. And that's why when it comes to Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, it's not enough to remember. You've got to relive it. That's the Seder. It's only through reliving, telling the story, talking about it, learning it, seeing it, touching it, feeling it, eating it. You've got to live it with all your body to be able to feel it with the same intensity that you did in the moment. And so with sitting in the sukkah, and so with Neiros Chanukah. If it's Pirsumah Denisa, why don't we put banners up? Why don't we do what we do for Pirsumah Denisa for Megillah? So we discussed in the Chanukah Shir, which I hope you listened to. It should be on YouTube tonight. Why Megillah has also got to be Pirsumah Denisa. You've also got to make the nice famous. How do you do it? You do it by reading the Megillah. So why don't we tell the story of Chanukah? Why the menorah? Because for Chanukah we've got to relive. Pirsumah Denisa means act the miracle out in public, because the initial miracle was done in the Beis Hamikdash. Nobody saw it. That incredible miracle of Chanukah, only the Kohanim saw. There was no Facebook, there was no live streaming. Who saw it? It was inside the Beis Hamikdash. So it was all second-hand. Pirsumah Denisa is now make it public. Now relive, redo it, light your menorah in a way that you feel yourself as the Chashmonaim, lighting a menorah with only enough candle and enough oil for one night, and you light it the first night, and the second, and the third, and it lasts for 8 nights. Relive the whole thing in action, not in memory. Because memory, even a moment or two after the event, is so diluted. Memory, even a few moments after the event, has lost that power of the extraordinary. And although one still remembers the event, it's a memory that makes things fairly ordinary. To be able to recapture the extraordinariness of an event, to be able to recapture the power and the drama of a moment, you have to be able to relive it with every cell in your body, with every emotion, with every feeling, and to make it real once again.